Hello and welcome to Bags of Action. My name is Pete and this is a 5-minute Bags of Action review of Mission Impossible from 1996. So, back in the 90s, this film brought back the popular 60s and 70s TV series reimagined as a movie. And I doubt at the time that they were expecting to be making sequels and continuing the franchise over 20 years later. The story is by David Coop, who wrote Jurassic Park, Spider-Man and Carlito's Way, and Steve Zaillian, who wrote Schindler's List, Moneyball and recently The Irishman, with a screenplay by Coop and Robert Towne, who wrote Chinatown and Tequila Sunrise. And the film is directed by a big name, Brian De Palma, who directed Dressed to Kill, Scarface, Untouchables and the previously mentioned Carlito's Way. And of course this has a big name cast too. Tom Cruise, of course, Jon Voight, Emmanuelle Béart, Reno, Ving Rhames, Kristin Scott Thomas, Vanessa Redgrave and Emilio Estevez all appear in this movie, amongst others. Now, I saw half of this film back in the 90s on VHS when I was at university, but managed to fall asleep and miss the end. Now, that isn't really any kind of damning indictment on this movie. It's more about me being tired at the time. So I finally decided, years later, to actually revisit the series because I haven't seen, apart from that half a movie, I haven't actually seen them, and everyone talks about the recent ones a lot. So what happens in this first one? What's the premise? An American agent, under false suspicion of disloyalty, must discover and expose the real spy without the help of his organisation. So the new Mission Impossible films are promoted now as being high-octane action with a very modern feel. So it's a little bit odd now going back to this very 90s movie. The technology in particular is quite amusing through 21st century eyes, with big computer screen monitors, dial-up modems, and spy technology that's probably less advanced than what most of us can do on our smartphones these days. That said, it's the team dynamic and the spy intrigue that draws you in so quickly. A bit like True Lies, it gives the equivalent of James Bond, but with a team alongside him in the way that heist movies like Ocean's 11 tend to work, or movies with mercenaries like Predator, each one with a differing set of skills. In some ways it reminded me of Enemy of the State, which would come 2 years later, and I did sit and imagine what this film would be like if Tony Scott, for example, had been in the director's chair. So IMF Impossible Mission Force is where Ethan Hunt works as a point man under Jon Voight and alongside his core team. And at first it's odd to see a big star like Tom Cruise in what feels like an ensemble movie, rubbing shoulders with the rest of the cast as just one of them. But it doesn't take long for that dynamic to change, as the premise promised. Overall, this film is very 90s, so bringing on board two of the coolest actors at the time, courtesy of Pulp Fiction and Leon, Ving Rhames and Jean Reno, in the second half of the film really helps. There isn't actually that much action in this movie really, certainly not by modern standards, but what there is very well done indeed. The initial mission that goes wrong is shown off really well, with knives, guns and explosions, and you can see and how it remained later as we get more information is interesting. I loved how Cruise's character would replay things in his head to work them out, a bit like in the recent Equalizer movies or TV's Sherlock have done since. I loved the way the story moved around, again very James Bond, going from Prague to London, and at the time the Channel Tunnel was really new and they brought that into the story too, complete with comedy actor David Schneider as the train engineer. At times you get the feeling only Cruise has been given a three-dimensional character to play with, however, and everyone else is relegated to almost one-note roles that are extensions of tropes. But saying that, style over substance can be okay when the style is handled this well. In Brian De Palma, they have a seasoned top-drawer director who knows exactly what he's doing. The final scenes with the train top sequence, which hasn't aged all that well, and helicopter going into the tunnel, still manages to put you on the edge of your seat. And the sequence, of course, where Hunt is lowered down to get a disc with undercover identities on it is suitably tense. If you think too long about the plot, the floppy disk, the coded Bible messages, and online searching, you can easily start to think this is all far too far-fetched. But in a way that's part of the charm. These are impossible missions after all, and Cruise has the charm and commitment to the role to pull it off. I think if a lesser actor was in the main role, there probably wouldn't have been so many of these films. Where 80s action movies feel of their time, 90s one can feel a little trapped between the more jingoistic previous decade and where action movies have headed since. And in some ways, watching this film now, it's a bit like a time capsule as a result, and I'm fascinated to see what they've done to keep this world alive in so many highly regarded films. The plot is quite predictable, it's relatively easy to follow, but as I say, this film is well made, well put together, and Tom Cruise embodies the role of Ethan Hunt, as he'll go on to do in a number of movies in the future. I don't think I can quite give this film 4 bags, though I may have done if I'd watched it all at the time, so I'm going to give Mission Impossible a respectable 3 bags of action, and I'll be watching the second one very soon. So, have you seen Mission Impossible? Do you agree with my assessment of it? Feel free to comment below or get in touch with us via email, Facebook, or on Twitter. We have new episodes coming out regularly, alongside, of course, our full-length podcast with me and my co-host. And don't forget to give us a like and to subscribe to the channel.